We've got some exciting restaurant openings happening in 2026 that we want to bring your attention to. A new culinary competition, and Ray's got some quick hits on stuff like Miso, and then I have some insights into why restaurants are closing. This is the Repertoire podcast. Welcome back to another Repertoire report. My name is Justin Khanna. I'm here with Ray DeLucci. How are you, man?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. It's been a turbulent week. I thought I was going to be able to get right back to it, and then we had some family health scares happen this week. So I'm admittedly a little bit tired heading into this week, but the show must go on, and there's some exciting stuff that's been happening, even though it's for a lot of people coming off of the holiday craziness, this might be kind of a slow time. But I think there's probably chefs listening who are putting together a Valentine's Day menu if that isn't already live for you. And so I'm just excited to be with you back and covering some stuff. Kudos to you, just really quick on that. Does Michelin improve a food city piece that you did last episode with the Denver article? I thought that was really, really interesting, and just want to give you your flowers here for just some exciting content that I'm even weirdly using to catch up on industry news in the slew of life.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think maybe that was a question that I left that if you wanted to give a brief 2 to 3 minute answer on is as we see Denver expand, it's all based off of tourism boards, funding, getting them to come to a city. If a city, what if Denver came out and said it wasn't worth it? What happens to that dining scene? Is it totally screwed? Not obviously they're gonna have great restaurants, but is there a massive negative impact for Michelin leaving? Because the layperson might go, oh, well, they're not Michelin recommended anymore. That must mean that the quality went
Yeah.
down. When really
Yeah.
it's just a financial play. So any thoughts on that before we get to today?
No, I agree with you on the normie assessment of, that's one big utility that Michelin provides in the marketplace, is making sure that, the average Joe can have some sort of discernment when it comes to restaurant quality. And that helps in cities where there was no precedent for evaluating restaurants aside from, local bloggers or the critic at the local publication or whatever. But I think the one case study that comes to mind that I think I can kind of bring to mind in the tenure that I've been in the industry is LA. So for those that don't remember, LA had a Michelin guide, and then it was not a Michelin, it was not a Michelin rated city anymore for a while. And a lot of that talent, a lot of the points that you brought up in the episode, it's that talent went to New York or just moved upstate to San Francisco in the Bay Area. And so all of those restaurants, French Laundry included, Meadowood, Cezanne, all of these heavy hitters that most of us are familiar with when it comes to California, were there. And then I think that what you saw was almost there was an asymmetry that the market identified, where it was LA has a lot of tastemakers from a people perspective. There's enough income in LA. There's enough good product in LA, where almost if you've ever seen a neighborhood in your city get kind of taken over by artists, where it's there's potential here and there's enough, scrappiness that can happen. All the ingredients, pardon the pun, are here. And some of those people go, and that's what we saw in LA before the Michelin Guide came back to LA as a city and kind of took over all of California. And so it'll be an interesting thing to see what happens. Where is that something where they lose it, and then everybody says oh, the mountains are where the next American culinary renaissance is going to come from, and then all of a sudden there's this kind of resurgence, and we might see that with places like Utah getting included in the guide because their tourism boards are interested in investing that. So, anyways, to not start it off on a Michelin note, I do want to switch to two other publications here. Wine Spectators and Bloomberg's had two pieces that both we're going to link in the description. So Wine Spectator had exciting restaurant openings, 9 of them for 2026 that they wanted to cover. And then Kat Odell, who we've covered her work before, she's almost positive the wife of Chef Mike Begal from Sip and Guzzle in New York. She wrote a piece for Bloomberg called The 20 Most Exciting Restaurant Openings Across the U.S. And I want to couch this piece, frame it, so to speak, in the sense of I was not aware that so many of these places were really going for it. I think we've covered places who are it's a new small 40-seat restaurant. I'm talking chefs that you are super, super familiar with, where I don't know what is surging this. Ray, I don't know if you have any thoughts on what is kind of fueling this expansion, because I think on one hand we're covering restaurants are having a hard time. There's a lot of closures that we're experiencing. The economy is maybe in this unshaky place. But then you're seeing some of these, there's two in these articles that I'm going to bring up here that are 10,000 square foot plus facilities. And we're talking about chefs like Kyle Connaughton, Simon Kim from Cote. We have Daniel Boulud has a new concept that he's, slated to launch. Chefs from 11 Madison Park who are ex-sous chefs. the people who consulted on the Bear, all sorts of people are kind of like really launching and going for it. And so I don't know if this is like another symptom of the K-shaped economy that we're experiencing, if the funding that people are trying to find is a little bit more easy to come by these days, or if it is the almost like the fallout from COVID and all of these restaurants that have closed and some of these real estate things. There's a Gabriel Kreuther place that's going to open in Hudson Yards. When that, concept had a whole just kind of like slew of openings and closings and drama with some of that stuff. So I just want to, that is one kind of like angle that I want to pose this from. The second one is just to make you aware of like potential competition in the area that you happen to be working in, whether that city happens to be, there's a new chef coming to town. We're going to cover a new restaurant group that has only been siloed to New York City that is now going to be in new metropolitan areas. And then the last one is like, if you are the type of person who is like, we're going to go through some advice later on in the show today. If you're stuck at your place, or you having some ambitions for more, or you're starting to decide, hey, I'm in culinary school and I'm wanting to think about my first position, it's like being aware of some of these new places is very, very beneficial, at least from my experience, in a way that you can join an opening team. You can start early at a place. You can start to see some of the ins and outs for how a concept gets built. That is incredibly valuable, especially if you have ambitions for yourself to open a new place. And I certainly had, there's just like a ton of learnings that came from being on an opening team. And so we don't always cover the new openings from a splashiness perspective here, but there was just a little bit too many, and everybody's doing their like 2026 prediction stuff that I just wanted to kind of cover some of them here. And so the first one is this one called So No Ma, which is just kind of a, Japanese play on words from the folks at Singlethread, and they're opening it in Kyoto. And so that was something that I just totally did not see coming. I know that Chef Kyle has like a huge connection to Japan. He spent time working there, and there is obviously so much benefit that him and his team get from either sending team members there or, doing guest chef dinners with chefs from Japan. But that is going to be definitely one to watch. Again, I mentioned... Go ahead.
I could add into that one is actually I was able to eat at Singlethread in 2018. I was in the Culinary Institute of America. I was in the Farm to Table program. Our chef was able to hook us up with a free meal. Like we literally ate there for free as part of our curriculum. And what I think was interesting about this one was reading it. So we toured their farm, which was insane, that they pull a lot of their food from. And the whole idea was that the farm, due to like where the soil and the location in California, they actually were able to match up with Japanese growing techniques and to grow Japanese vegetables. And what's interesting with them is that they say here, when they cross the ocean, they're going to work with, Katina is going to work with farmers in Japan's Kansai region to grow unique Northern Californian varieties of vegetables. So where they were growing the Japanese varieties here, they're bringing the California varieties to Japan to show them that. So I think that was a really cool like transition if you're deep into like the Singlethread idea of how they do things. I think that's a really nice touch for their new location.
Yeah, huge. And it does play off of a theme we've been covering on the show of the kind of chef plus idea where, Chef Kyle's wife in Katina is the farmer who, again, gives them that incredible competitive advantage in the market of, you go to Sonoma and it's like, oh my goodness, there's, vegetables here that whether it's the varietal or the size or they really focus on terroir. There's stuff where you can't get it anywhere else. And so it's almost if you're making the decision on which 3-star place should we go to, there's almost a novelty and a uniqueness to Singlethread. In addition to like the incredible room and the level of service and the wine program, there's a bunch of stuff there that is just huge. And I know that even CIA has gone on to send students from their first ever master's program to Singlethread. And there's a person who has been in Total Station Nomination who has done that experience. And so it's like it's can't say enough good things. Especially, I've eaten there twice. I had a roommate who was on the opening team of that restaurant. And so there's, just tons of flowers to give there. Moving on down the list, we have Gabriel Kreuther, who is obviously known for his award-winning establishment under, I'm almost positive that it's a self-titled restaurant. He's opening a place called Severn, located inside the Spiral office building in Hudson Yards. Spoiler alert, that's the one that I was kind of covering. It will be a reinterpretation of the classic brasserie centered on wood fire grilling and more. And that is opening in February of 2026. So that's this month they're opening. The one that I was most excited to see was Union Square Hospitality Group is expanding beyond New York. I did not see this coming. And so Danny Meyer's Union Square Hospitality Group will expand to both Boston and Detroit in 2026. The group has deep ties to New York City, and these will be its first expansions in the United States. So as of now, they have some restaurant concepts that are slated to open in both respective cities. The only one that I've personally been to is the Chisiamo, and that's opening in the Seaport district of Boston. And that's going to be Chef Hillary Sterling and as kind of heading that up. And so spring 2026 is going to be Detroit, and then early summer is going to be Boston. Very, very excited to see. We've seen a lot of these restaurant groups be siloed to their own city. As we're talking about sharing resources, as we're talking about operational efficiency, it's just easier to be. Ray, I'm almost positive Lettuce Entertain You is the big Chicago one. I know Paul Kahn obviously has like his big, outpost. And then in New York, it's been Union Square Hospitality Group, in addition to a bunch of others that have, Made Nice was the one that Will Gadara and Daniel Hume had. But I think that that's just a very interesting thing to keep our eyes on, as Danny Meyer has gotten so much experience in scaling something like Shake Shack, going from, it's just this little New York City outpost to obviously it's a publicly traded thing. They have locations all over the US and even arguably all over the world now. And so that, again, isn't something that I saw coming, because Shake Shack to me was his scalable concept. And then the Union Square Hospitality stuff was like, this is just our small town New York thing. I don't know. I want to pause there and maybe get your thoughts on the Union Square expansion.
Funny, I had Shake Shack this weekend in Illinois. We had one just open up. My daughter loves to go and eat there, and so we went there. And I mean, it's my favorite like burger of those like chains.
Yeah.
But what was very like so impressive, had to wait a little bit for my pickup order. The amount of times people checked in, offered me something else, the experience, the hospitality experience, like just from Shake Shack. It's just cool to see that his philosophy kind of transcends into those. And again, user experiences will vary, but it was very. It showed that there was a lot of care. Yeah, I think I'm interested in that one a lot. I know we're gonna cover one down here, Ginji, or I think it's what it's called, but it's from Boca Restaurant Group, and so they're huge in Chicago. They obviously have Boca, which is my favorite, one of my favorite restaurants in Chicago, but they are opening one as well. It's on both lists, and I'm very excited for that. And I think it's just interesting that these core powerhouse groups in Chicago, New York, New York is expanding, but then Chicago is taking a swing at a new concept. So it is interesting to see these larger groups start to kind of go out of their brand, whether it be a new concept or a totally new city and region.
We might as well just touch on that one. It's opening in March of 2026. Again, it's Gingie. So I don't know if it's Ginji or Ginji, but it is, again, Brian Lockwood is the chef of that. So for those that aren't familiar, he was a sous chef at 11 Madison Park. And then he, almost I'm positive, worked at the French Laundry as well as a chef de partie, I was reading. And then he consulted on The Bear. And now he's, again, being the head chef of Ginji in Chicago, again, with the Boca Restaurant Group. So all of that infrastructure, all of that talent, all of that like reputation is going to kind of come with that. And just seeing some of the food that they've been, at least Brian has been posting, it's been, again, going to keep my eyes on it for sure. The other two that I thought were notable we'll leave the links to all of the other ones in the description here. One is a place called Ox and Olive. Quote, in a string of high-profile chefs expanding into steakhouses, in DC, Chef Ryan Rotino will focus on all things beef with the opening of Ox and Olive in Georgetown. The menu will be rooted in American steakhouse essentials, oysters, martinis, and ribeyes. Rotino's other projects include the Japanese-influenced tasting menu Jaunt. So for those that aren't familiar with that, I'm almost positive that has 2 Michelin stars. And then the last one was a place called Monami will switch coasts and go to San Francisco. This is opening in fall of 2026, so a little bit further out. But this is going to be a California wine love letter plus, Korean steakhouse in the Pacific Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. And this is like, again, a star-studded, this is the varsity team coming out of the gate and just being like incredible from day one. And so this is going to be from a follow-up to Best Award of Excellence winner Sal, Ssal. And so Monami draws influence from Chef Junsu's tenure at Meadowood and Hyun Young's experience at the Grand Award winner in the French Laundry. And so Giacomo Latona is going to oversee the wine program there as well. So it's just, again, this is a chef plus scenario. This is also a well-pedigreed person who's coming in with a skill set that is going to be ready to execute on day one. There's not going to need to be any of these like hiccups, or obviously you have some, but it is not to the level of, what we're seeing. And so what I'm hoping and maybe looking forward to is like seeing some of these rapid accelerations to accolades and stars and some of these things that we've been covering. But I think when you see these hype projects, sometimes, not to speak bad on any of these, but sometimes you can see these fizzle. But I think as we've been seeing some of these people who are like incredibly focused, a lot of these seem like they know what they want to be and what they're kind of going for. And so I'm just very, very excited. That's the Wine Spectator piece. Any thoughts on those other couple that I covered?
No, I'm excited to see what they do, how they do it. Did you see the Nancy Silverson one?
Yeah. So those are the last few. These are coming from the Bloomberg piece. So the first one is a crazy like triple layered concept in New York, and he posted that he was like, if you want to like work at the highest level, have excellence encoded into you, and this is Simon Kim talking about this concept. It's a 15,000 square foot Rockwell Group designed space at 550 Madison, and so I think 550 Madison is what they're calling the concept or the project, and then there's three concepts inside of it. So one is Sushi Yoshitake. That's on the top floor, or at least on a higher floor. The second on the ground floor is one called Chimera, which will operate as a lunch dinner restaurant with an under wraps food concept and three distinct bars, each centered on a specific drink. And then there's buzz about a second Cote location. So for those that don't know, Cote is their like Korean steakhouse concept that has just taken New York by storm, located in a dramatically lit subterranean area. And so there's executive chef David Shim will serve Cote's classics like Butcher Feast and the Build Your Own Caviar and Sea Urchin Gimbap rice roll, along new yet to be announced dishes, and that's supposedly opening in April. So that's a huge one. The other one that was like scale wise really, really notable was the 10,000 square foot all day bistro that spans 2 floors called Brasserie Boulud from chef Daniel Boulud. So at the back of that concept, a separate 20-seat red and gold toned bar and lounge will mix craft cocktails for the Lincoln Center crowd across the street, and that is noted to be opening in the spring. And then you mentioned the Nancy Silverton projects. That's called LAPABA, La Paba, in Los Angeles. And so that is going to be a Korean accented pasta bar in Koreatown in LA. In an Avengers-like move, she's teamed up with other notable hospitality stars, including Tanya and Joe Bastianich and local restaurateur Robert Kim, to open the 2,200 square foot place. And so I'm very, very interested, obviously, to like, the only one that comes to mind is this place in Minneapolis I went to that was a Japanese-Italian fusion concept. Incredibly delicious, super, super fun concepts and dishes and combinations coming out of that place. But again, it's as we start to see some of these like, everybody is this is kind of what I mentioned in my prediction episode, where it's these are things kind of like smashing together as opposed to a new cuisine, so to speak. It's not like that it's not a reinvention of the wheel. This looks very much so, again, they literally call it an Avengers teaming up that's happening here. And so those are the ones that kind of caught my eye. But again, it's getting some insights into who's opening, what their ideas are, what the talk of the town is going to be, as some of, you know, the guests who are coming to the place that you're working at right now happen to be experiencing at the place down the street. I just think it's interesting to pay attention to some of this stuff.
I also think there's a cool one in Chicago. I believe it's open now. That was on my list. Two cool ones just locally. One is Creepies. This was the team behind Elske. It's West Loop Bistro. It's a Midwestern influence fare. So it's like roasted chicken liver with wine sauce, Parisian gnocchi, tart flambe. So more like that Midwestern-ish vibe. And then Joe Flom actually just opened a new restaurant. This, I believe it opened at the end of December's Bartuto. And this is basically one that, quote, aims to please with breakfast chocolate-filled bombolini, egg sandwiches, and coffee service from Cafe Umbria in the morning, and then porchetta sandwiches and tortellini and burrito at lunch. And for dinner, pork collar with peaches and polenta, and then the signature fresh-made pasta. So a little bit more laid back for Joe Flom to get his, obviously, cuisine out there. So there's some interesting restaurant openings. So exciting.
So to pivot and just give the other side, because I want to keep this at least reasonably balanced and not, obviously I'm an optimist. I think you are too, Ray, but there is obviously, like, we talk about the K-shaped economy, we talk about winners and losers, we talk about openings and closings here on the show. There's another piece from torontolife.com that David Schwartz wrote. And so he is a chef who, the start of this piece says, quote, "The gap between perceived value and the true cost of doing business is becoming unmanageable." And so this piece is all about on why your favorite restaurants close. Just because your go-to spot is always busy doesn't mean it's safe. And so I had this circulating around my personal social media feeds. I don't know if you saw the same, Ray, when this was initially kind of published. A couple friends who own food businesses decided to kind of like break it down or provide some personal context to how they're experiencing the industry and financials and running a business and being an operator. And so some of this stuff, like, highly recommend you read it if this is something where you're struggling to put into words what you're either experiencing in your own business, or if you're the type of person who like listens to the show and you don't work in the industry at all, you just happen to love food and restaurants and chef culture, how to potentially like educate either yourself or some of the people that you go out to eat with who are maybe not so read up on how these businesses work. And so I wanted to provide a couple of quotes here, And then again, we'll link the full story in the description. So the first one is on the danger of this like survival pricing, how he words it. So, quote, failed restaurants weren't pricing their menus to maximize profitability. They were pricing their menu items to match their diners' perceptions of what those items are worth. Menus are priced to survive judgment on rather than to reflect full cost. And so this is the tension that we've been talking about probably over the last, I don't know what, Ray, what would you say, like a year, on this idea of like raising your prices
and beyond that, honestly, just our own personal conversations way beyond that.
Totally. And so this idea of, and I've said this very plainly, you need to charge what you need to charge. And then all of the other flow-on effects from that are going to be more manageable, whether it's through education, whether it's making content, whether it's that like bedside manner, almost like tableside service, you know, including notes on the website. Obviously, there's going to be that initial shock, but it is this almost short-term pain, long-term gain that you can see these restaurants experience that have the courage and the operational vision almost. It's almost, you have to almost transcend the spreadsheet to think about like, if we don't continue to do this, it's going to lead to these results because the math just doesn't math. We've talked about some of these restaurants being businesses as opposed to, you know, showcases of whatever you want to phrase it as. And so that in and of itself was like a really big, like, it's again, a different way to word it. I'm constantly thinking about this behavior change stuff in both the clients that I work with and you folks leaving comments with. And it's almost like you have to hear it in the right way in order for it to sometimes make a behavior change in you. And so I can talk about, you know, either financially or numerically how all of this stuff works out, but I understand and I can empathize with the reasons why some people don't do this. Maybe we should take these point by point, Ray. So like on the survival pricing, I hadn't quite heard it phrased in this way. Do you have any thoughts on that? I obviously kind of know your, you know, broad brush strokes on it, but any thoughts?
There's a piece in this that I think was really interesting, and I know we're gonna go. I think that really speaks to this. Is they go that the pastrami sandwich at Linny's Luncheonette, our deli counter on Ossington, encapsulates this challenge. So the sandwich is priced at $16.60, and that price is often criticized. Although it's being one of their most popular items, it's criticized for the price. And they go on to say that they only use Ontario beef that's premium, brine trimmed, rubbed, smoked for 12 hours, rested, steamed, trimmed again, sliced to order, and served as 1/3 of a pound on fresh bread with mustard. And they go on to say that after food, labor, rent, packaging, and utilities are accounted for, that sandwich ends up costing $15 to make. So one of their most popular items, they only make $1.60 on each one that's sold. And so this is exactly what you're talking about. It's like you can have this popular item, but again, the pricing, the $16 sandwich, they're only making $1.60 on it. And people will go, "Oh, it's so expensive. Why are you charging so much?" You're only like, could you imagine? Like, that is insane. And that is the struggle and the issue that restaurants have right now.
I think that also highlights one of the important factors here, which is those are the only two things. If we really boil it down, obviously there's going to be somebody in the comments that says like, oh, well, you can do this economies of scale thing to try to get this marginal improvement here. But it's like costs can go up or down or price can go up or down. And if you really boil it down to that, sometimes there's a little bit of like a rock meets a hard place moment when you're talking to somebody who's setting the price for their menu. And if you really dig down, some of these things are emotional, right? Like I grew up being able to buy a $6 sandwich and the idea of charging, you know, going from $16.60 to $19 is crazy to me. And so, but okay, you know what I mean? But then it's like, what are you going to tell the person at the end of the month who's, you know, your purveyors, your staff, you know, like any of the things, food, labor, rent, packaging, utilities, the utilities company is going to reach out to you with your bill at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, and they're going to tell you that you need to pay up. And the excuse of, I didn't want to charge more than $16.60, it's not going to cut it with them. And so again, this is like a little bit of tough love that I'm inserting here because I want you to be able to have a successful, profitable business and do what you need to do to sustain the operations that you are doing in your community and for your team and for yourself creatively. And so all of this stuff I think is just really important. I'm going to continue to hammer it home here because it is this thing that you might need to hear this 16 times. And this is the 7th time you hear me say it. And so it's like, you know, bear with me while I get the last few out there. It's just, it's so important. And I just get upset when I see people go out of business because they were just like, again, if there are other reasons, whether it's like there's a family legacy thing where or there's a contract that you have signed or you got totally screwed on the way that your rent is or, you know, a particular, that's why we cover some of the beef, you know, prices going crazy high. And it's just this little thing that we just need to ride it out and then the prices are going to go down. All of that stuff I understand. But if it's like if this is just an issue of you being nervous or worried about blowback, I think, again, back to what I mentioned, it is a short-term pain thing. Yes, I'm not disagreeing with you that it's probably going to hurt to get those comments and get those people who are going to say, please do not go to this place. It's so expensive. But then it's like, would you rather have that? Or would you rather have to, make that post in a couple of months where it is, hey, everyone, it's been a great run, but unfortunately we need to close because, and you might not even give the reasons. There's all sorts of stories that happened there. Okay.
Restaurants
Go
are
ahead.
one of the few businesses that are shamed for wanting to make any sort of profit, while at the same time having the highest expectations of quality and final end product service. Like
Totally.
there is an air that everything should be cheap, nothing should be expensive, and for good reason. Like obviously like, people have like financial issues, but again, it's just like, restaurants are one of the few businesses where that's the outlet gap where everything else goes up, but you expect the restaurant, one of the businesses on the thinnest margins, to be not only cheap but offer the highest quality all the time, and it should be high quality. Quality should be put up, but the prices are rarely reflective for restaurants, and that is why restaurants are so tough in the food industry as a whole because that expectation by customers. Where again, where you can't expect people to pay, everything like full price, but at the same time, there's not much leeway for restaurants where it's like, hey, I might need to raise this $2. Oh, you're trying to gouge us for pricing. No, I'm negative on this dish. I'm trying to keep it on because it's one of our most popular, but the costs are too high now, whether it be economy, imports, tariffs, whatever it is. And they're one of the few industries where you can't just go, all right, we're going to raise everything by 10% to account for tariffs without getting major blowback by customers. So I understand the author here.
Well, and even talking about the points that he made, talking about all of those steps that go into making that sandwich. We talk about this idea of perceived value all the time, Ray, you and I, and in all the pieces that we cover that talk about this, but it is this idea of, is the value that you're providing being perceived by the customer? And so is it an issue where you're putting in all this extra work and all this extra stuff that is the guest either isn't aware of it because whether or not I've certainly worked in places like this, Ray, you can probably bring some examples where it's like total above and beyond steps and, additional flourishes that like the guest maybe doesn't necessarily care about, or it doesn't actually influence the final quality of the product, or it is an education problem. So like you're doing all this work, but then you're presenting it as just like, this is our beef sandwich, as opposed to, that's why I talk about the talking about food idea, where it's like you being able to give that spiel, spin that story, tell that narrative about why it's, the price that it is. You can poo-poo all day long the people who have the showmanship to be able to talk about the quality of product that they're doing. But it's like, those are the stories that you and I are going to tell our friends when it's like, hey, I just went to this place and it's incredible because, and then what else do you say after that? That's what I talked about the show dish in that episode that I did. And then the last one is like the perceived value piece being, what are the, if they're not being wowed by this step of service or this additional, step that we're doing in the preparation of this thing, what is the thing that they're having negatives on? It's like you can layer on, but like after the experience, what is the common criticism? Read the reviews, like go into the inbox. It's painful to like see this feedback sometimes, but is it like, I covered a story before we started working together, Ray, of this chef who was like really creative food, really amazing room, but consistently you look in the Google reviews and it's like portion quantities are too small. And so its perception of value was not look at where we're sourcing our vegetables and the steps that we're doing on our proteins during service. It is, I am not getting enough food for the price that I'm paying here. And that is just it's a painful smack in the face. But when we're talking about perceived value, like really sit down and ask yourself that question of like, when people come to experience us, what are they perceiving? And like, that can be sometimes a more like cut through the noise type of question. You get a better answer rather than saying, how do I make this more valuable? I don't know. It was just something that came up as I was researching this piece.
Well, it's also, I think, and we've covered the idea all restaurants taste the same. You see with this restaurant, like not all restaurants do that. Like, and I think there's this because you get something from Cisco, you're automatically bad. So like
Right.
you said, Cisco's a distributor. You can get a lot of things from Cisco but you're still making it all from scratch. But for me, it's like it has in 2026. You talked about the in real life position. Restaurants that are doing stuff like smoking, brining, curing beet, whatever it is, you need to tell your customers that. Not only if you raise prices, but just in general. Because unfortunately, how it's going is there's now communication by a lot where, and I'm not, this isn't like some conspiracy, but just like the feeling is everything's expensive. Restaurants are falling to the lowest common denominator and trying to just make the best food. And that's not the case. There are a lot of talented chefs busting their ass to make really good food, delicious food with, really fun ingredients, really specific culinary techniques, really in depth culinary techniques. And to just write them off in all this like blanket term is like a really bad way to go about approaching restaurants. And so I would say that, like, you know, understand that like that's not the case for every restaurant. Like this, and you have to just balance too. I think as all of us as consumers, we have to balance. Like this weekend, told my family we are going to order from the Indian restaurant down the road that I love. We have not ordered there a while. I keep those mental notes in my head. Like we haven't supported them in a minute. We need to support them this weekend. And I think it's unfortunate, but we need to go to a point where consumers take up. Where if you claim you love a restaurant, you claim you really like a restaurant, support them. Make it a monthly item. Make it a yearly item. Actually show up for the businesses you support because this is why I start. One of the reasons I started Line Cook Thoughts. It's people don't realize how hard restaurant work is, how hard restaurant ownership is, and it is somewhat on the consumer that if you want your favorite places to survive, you need to go to them. And again, I know funds are tight. This doesn't mean like go out every week or every day, but every 2 months, maybe put it on your calendar. Hey, I need to go support this restaurant I really like. Again, if your favorite restaurant's Alinea, you might have a hard time at that. But if your favorite restaurant is an Indian place, like I have Indian Harvest down the road, like that's an awesome place that I have no problem supporting once or twice every 1 or 2 months. So that's just my thoughts. It is on restaurateurs to tell that story, but it's also on the consumer to start to really support the brands and the chefs that they love. Otherwise, there is no keeping them for long if you do not support them.
I think a interesting tag along with that is that it matters that the restaurants are charging what they need to be charging when that support comes. And that was the last quote that I wanted to bring up here, which was on the disconnect between revenue and profit. So he says, quote, distorted pricing sends the wrong signal. It's easy to assume that a full dining room means a healthy business, but a packed restaurant can still net very little if pricing is not aligned with real costs. And so, Ray, I know that in the Line Cook Thoughts days, you were really hammering this idea of being understanding about what food cost actually looks like and getting at least a little bit educated on the numbers that go on with the food costs and the way that you're doing business. But I think this even speaks to a bigger issue of, I always have this analogy in my head of like holes in a boat, and then you're like you're bucketing out water at the same rate that the water is kind of coming in. And so you can have this, it looks really busy. I think a lot of us have seen places where it's like, oh, that place closed? They always had a line out the door. Oh, they always had, people in seats. I never saw them being completely empty. And that's what he's touching on in this article, which is, again, it's a bigger problem of they are not charging what they need to be charging. And so they're breaking even or potentially losing money. And then if you're breaking even, that might be, okay, hey, Justin, we're fine. But then what happens when, you have an electrical issue or you need to call a plumber or, 2/3 of your staff ends up, either having something sweep through from an illness perspective or, I don't know, anything that could potentially happen that we can run down the list of that provides this unexpected expense to the business. And now all of a sudden you're underwater. And that just, again, we've just seen it too many times. And so I sometimes feel like a broken record telling some of these stories, but I don't know. I want to bring it up because I think there's new listeners to the show all the time. And I want to see people stay open and do well and be profitable. That's maybe the last thing that I'll end on, which is you will never hear Ray or I on this show ostracize you for making profit. We will ostracize you or maybe make fun of you or, like call you out if you're like being exploitative, right? Like if you're doing poor business practices. But this is an environment, if you listen to the Repertoire podcast, like we want you to make money. We want you to be profitable. We want you to run businesses that do right by your people and create really great experiences in the market. And the market will decide in a lot of ways. And that's why we cover these stories in the way that the posture we take when we're covering these is not every restaurant deserves to be successful. But it very much so is a story of, I think you and I, Ray, like when you come up and you're, a struggling line cook and you don't have the money to go do a $250 tasting menu, it's like you get to that place and you see this in some of the press releases when some of these restaurants open. It's like, well, we don't want to charge too much. And it's like, no, you need to charge what you need to charge. I'm going to say it over and over again because it's like at the end of the day, the P&L is unemotional, so to speak.
Yep.
All right. why don't you do some quick hits? I know that I have a quick hit, and then we're going to do an advice piece that one of you folks asked in the comments. I don't know the scale at which we're going to be able to keep up with like me going through every individual comment that asks for advice, but I definitely want to kind of in the current scale that we're at, I want to be able to at least give you folks some dedicated time here on the show, and maybe it helps some other people who are listening. So go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, so I have 3 quick hits we'll go through real quick. First one is this just came up. I get Morning Brew, the newsletter, and I find it interesting. So this was Miso is the company, and they launched a fry station robot called Flippy. It's built from quote millions of baskets of real world data. I'm going to leave the link in the description. Not much to touch on, Justin, except for the fact that it's an AI powered fry station. Spent 5 years of deployment. They re-kitted it, and now we'll see what happens, I guess. But if just for those, I know there's been people commenting wanting to know about automation in the food industry. This is like the closest I've found for automation, this Flippy robot. Again, a lot of investment, probably time before it's in a lot of different restaurants. But if you're interested at all in food automation, that's all I had. I didn't have much beyond that, just sharing the link in the comments. Any points on that before we go to the next one?
Just some interesting numbers from that article. Quote, QSR, so quick service restaurant labor turnover, has hit 144% annually. That's crazy high. And then it also says fry stations now cost $86,000 per year in losses. And today, restaurant workers are 6.5 times more likely to get burned than average US workers. And so it says the old solution, hiring more fry cooks, doesn't work anymore. When restaurants post work with our robot, operators have seen applications jump from 0 to 200 plus. Gen Z wants technology jobs, not burns. That's a very interesting just trend change in the market of, again, the idea of, yeah, like people working in kitchens don't want, like you want to work with food, you want to work with people, you want to not sit behind a desk all day. But at the same time, as we've covered some of the, getting berated, we've covered that on the psychological side with chefs and the work environments that you kind of foster from a culture perspective. But this is also now talking about, I can imagine I wasn't around when like the RoboCoop was invented, but I can imagine this idea of like, oh my God, I get to work with, I don't have to like stand here and chop this thing, until it gets to this texture, or, hache this with 2 knives on the cutting board. I can just throw it into this thing and blitz it. That's an incredible innovation. Or even like going back further, the idea that Ray, you probably, who is that chef at CIA who would talk about like reloading the ovens, and then he would like dunk his hands in cold water and then like, turn stuff and like grab hot coals and like, it was a crazy like old French guy who would just talk about that was the environment that you needed to be able to stand in order to work in a kitchen. And again, it is this interesting, like as technology gets better, people are not going to have to deal with that anymore.
All right, next up, Impossible Foods. So Impossible Foods CEO to step down. This is Peter McGinnis. He worked to reframe the narrative around plant-based meat, saying the category was mismarketed and mislaunched. As someone who works in plant-based, I will agree that like while you do want to, market to plant-based only eaters, there is a lot of Americans want plants in their diet. They want more plants in their diet. So also ensuring that you reach out to people that are trying to eat more plant-based, having meat cut back, whether it's from cost or whether it's just from a health perspective. Like Americans are trending still, even with the Maha movement and everything. We are trending to eating more plants out of either necessity, health reasons. Like plants are coming, and fiber is huge this year. It's just a matter of how you get it. But I thought it was interesting because they said that McGinnis oversaw Impossible's efforts to bring more meat eaters to the sluggish plant-based segment by reframing the narrative around alternative meat. He previously said the sector made a mistake in positioning plant-based products as a climate solution, adding the industry was mismarketed and mislaunched. He overhauled the company's brand identity to better showcase that plant-based meat can taste and offer the same nutritional value as the real thing. Quote, Impossible is primed to further strengthen its position in the marketplace as a respected food company built for long-term success, said Fidel Bauchio, a long-standing member of Impossible's board of directors. Quote, we're grateful for Peter's impactful leadership as CEO, which helped establish Impossible as the strongest player in the category. They go on to say that U.S. retail sales of plant-based meat fell 7.5% in the year ending April 20th, with volumes down 10%. And despite some promise, higher prices and consumer perception around processed ingredients have hurt demand and led retailers to limit their offerings. More consumers are also flocking back to meat amid dizzying demand for protein. But plant-based brands are responding by playing up their capabilities as protein providers and entering adjacent categories. Like I said, working in the plant-based space, we're seeing fiber. Like fiber is the next fiber is the next protein. Americans as a whole are going to be moving towards plants. We have the Maha movement, but long run, they are moving towards plants. I do think, and I think the CEO, unfortunately, he did see this as like it's hard. It was hard to say it was a climate solution when there was this perception of over processed, right? Now, again, if you look into it, I found I covered this a while ago, like for Beyond Meat, there were ad pages taking out against Beyond Meat, against Big Meat Company, like there's just all these different things. But I think the deal is like you need to convince people that eating plants is good, and I think that's an easy thing to do. I just think they position themselves the wrong way. It'll be interesting to see where Impossible Foods go from here. Any thoughts before we move on to the last one?
No, I didn't bring this up in any of my like prediction things for a reason. I do not envy any of these companies. Just seeing the like the stock performance and the public perception of it and the way that they've even like decided to name the company. It's like, how do you pivot? That seems like such a big like business challenge. And so again, I'm happy we're covering it because it is this thing where like if you positioned your business to either kind of like heavily rely on some of these companies to source stuff or the way that your, like concept is structured, this might be an opportunity for you to kind of say like, am I either too locked in here? Maybe there's an opportunity to double down. I'm happy to be wrong, proven wrong here, but I do think that there's like a little bit of just, we want to make you aware of some of these leadership changes so that, again, if it's something that you really fully baked into your concept, you're aware that some of these things are happening.
I'll roll into the last one, then you can finish us.
Cool.
This one's going to be quick. So this I thought was interesting from Bloomberg. PepsiCo to cut Dorito prices as much as 15% to boost demand. So basically, they are cutting prices by as much as 15% for key brands, including Lay's and Doritos, in a bid to lift sales by offering more affordable products. Quote, we spent the last year listening closely to consumers, and they told us they're feeling the strain, Rachel Ferdinando, the chief executive of PepsiCo Foods US, says in a statement. The company had said in December it planned to reduce prices on key brands. Shares rose 3.7% on Tuesday. The stock gained 8.1% through this year through Monday's close, outpacing the 1.9% increase in the S&P 500. They've, quote, struggled to grow its sales in North America in recent years, but they are looking to revamp and basically look at pricing throughout the next year. They said that the lower prices would be offset by accelerated cost reduction efforts, reducing headcount, closing 3 plants, and consolidating several manufacturing lines with additional actions planned for the near future. They also said it would pare down its product portfolio by 20% in the first half of this year. They are also hoping to attract more consumers by beefing up offerings of healthier, clean label products made with lower sugar and more protein and, like I said before, fiber. The company already overhauled its Lay's potato chips packaging to be followed later by its Tostitos and Quaker brands, and it plans to revamp its Gatorade sports drink brand, including introducing a low-sugar version with no artificial colors or flavors. They would also make permanent its NKD, artificial color-free versions of some Doritos and Cheetos. I've actually tried the Cheetos. It's actually pretty funny how they do taste the exact same. They just don't have that weird dye. I live in a household with some immune compromised people, and so, any inflammation diet is really good. And, obviously they're still causing inflammation in some sense, but to take away the dyes, there is that perception of health. And so all that to say, it's very interesting. Again, they're paring down their product offering by 20%. They're shrinking, and unfortunately people are going to lose jobs. But then they're also reducing prices. So it'd be interesting to see what other CPG brands do in 2026.
I mean, these are decisions that are on scales that, that your average restaurant operator or, private chef is never going to have to experience. But I think it's so funny how it's almost like it's fractal. It goes all the way up to the top of like, they're focusing on costs. They're thinking about what the consumer is saying. Like, you notice some of these themes kind of like come up over and over again. And even, like I thought that this would happen more on the like McDonald's-y, Sweetgreen-y type of restaurants. When I talked about like less innovation, less like, trying to try out something crazy new and like just kind of go back to basics and focus on the thing that the consumer is literally saying. I just think it's like, this is a great example for somebody to see this being happening on a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar company. And so you can take a look and say like, okay, well, maybe I can do the same thing. Because again, they're really focused on the numbers because they want to be able to continue to survive.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, so I just had a quick thing that came across my feed because it's 2 ex-coworkers of mine, Chef Matt Peters and Chef Phil Tessier, are both going to be competing on a food competition show that I totally did not see coming because Matt Peters, he's a guy who won gold at the Bocuse d'Or, and then he moved to Austin and he was like going to open this restaurant concept. And then Phil Tessier, who I just got to see at Press when I had a meal there with my wife on a family trip to Napa, he like just totally revamped his kitchen. And then he has, I think it's called Understory or Understudy next door, which is like a butcher shop, like food purveying, place that you can also get a fantastic lunch at. And he is super involved with like the Boku store stuff. And then both of them were posting that like, hey, we're going to be on this culinary competition show, and it's called America's Culinary Cup. And so this is just a crazy, like story from a bunch of different headlines and heavy hitters that are involved in this. And so it's going to be on CBS. It's going to be 16 chefs that are going to start. Padma Lakshmi is like the main host that they're kind of like putting to the forefront as a judge. But then also Wiley Dufresne is a judge on the show, which I, again, totally didn't see coming. And the reason for me being kind of like exacerbated by this is I came up in a time when like Wiley Dufresne and Phil Tessier were two guys who were like the total other side of the spectrum from a TV chef kind of perspective. They were like all day in the kitchen, pushing the boundaries of innovation, peak performance. And now all of a sudden, like they're on a TV show. And I'm not saying it's bad at all. I'm just saying it is, your career is long. And this idea of like totally putting yourself in a box and saying, I will never, or I always, can be like really, really harmful, because the opportunities that these folks are going to receive is probably like really, really beneficial for this. In addition to like the exposure from the show and the just experience of being on this scale of a project, the big kind of carrot that they're dangling in front of everybody is that the winner will receive a $1 million cash prize, which CBS touts as the largest in culinary television history. I mean, this is Mr. Beast numbers that we're talking about here. And so I'm very, very curious to like see both how far, these, again, ex-coworkers of mine end up, making it. These were my bosses, basically. And like, obviously, there's some other chefs that are notable. James Beard Award winner and chef of Karate is Chef Katie Button. We have Beverly Kim, Michelin-starred chef and Top Chef alum from Chicago. Chris Morgan, who's a Michelin-starred chef and owner of June. I just think it's a really interesting framing, almost like a quality bump. I don't know if you'd even say quality. It's like usually when you see like Top Chef or, like any of these food competition shows, it is like Chopped maybe is like sous chef at XYZ restaurant, or a person who's a private chef for a family in LA goes on these shows to like compete. You don't see people, we've had a couple of different examples. I can't remember the names of the shows. Again, those are like just hot flashes in the pan, pardon the pun. But there was a guy who did a guest chef dinner with us, and then he was like on this culinary show, and it was like real heavy hitter people, guys who like, either own their own restaurants or have Michelin stars. I just think it's interesting to watch these guys compete and the challenges that they go through. So just really quickly to finish framing the show for everybody, the contestants will be tested against a series of 10 culinary commandments, is what they're calling it. So I'll read those off really quickly, and then maybe you can let us know in the comments if you agree with these being the 10 culinary commandments. So it's meat, vegetables, sauces, dessert, innovation, flavors, sustainability, world cuisine, consistency, culinary science, and technology. And so it's going to be 90-minute episodes, or at least the premiere is going to be 90 minutes on CBS. And it's going to be on Paramount Plus if there's any interest in, food competition world land. Do you have any thoughts? March 4th is when it premieres.
I like the lineup and all that. The commandment things is funny though, because like the commandments, directives, and just what's the first commandment? Beef. Like what? That's not really a commandment.
Yeah.
But beyond that, yeah, it's all good. But maybe the commandment thing needs a little bit more fleshing out to really realize that concept. But the rest sounds great to me.
Yeah, they're grasping a little bit. Okay, so we're going to end the show today with a comment from you folks. And so I love reading the comments. I think that like some of my earliest, like moments of being excited about creating content was this idea that like people are actually watching and getting value from the work that I'm doing. And so as I start to kind of like in 2026, move a lot of the content that I've been making and the focus that I'm putting on the Justin Khanna channel and moving a lot of that like industry stuff over to the Repertoire channel, I want to see those comments from you folks. And so I want to, just Ray suggested we cover this, but I obviously like love doing this stuff because it helps you folks in the real world. And so getting the context that you folks write in, whether it's through a Q&A stuff that we do or just in the comments, like we read the comments. Like when you folks write to us, like we're constantly getting your feedback and seeing some of the questions that you ask.
Yeah, someone said I was a culinary consultant. I'm not. It would be nice at some point, but I'm not a culinary consultant as of now.
I love it. Okay, so this one comes from MCRamseyXD. And the question is, I'm having trouble deciding between taking a shot at being an owner-operator of a food trailer and catering business or continuing to be a chef in a restaurant for a budding restaurant group that has a tendency to undermine and underpay, especially in comparison to chain full-service restaurants. I'm a first-time father as well, and my toddler is showing signs of developmental delay, which crushes me because I work crazy hours and still can barely afford the cost of groceries, rent, and my child's therapy, even in a 2-parent household. Our parents and village help a ton. I'm a realist, intellectual, a dedicated hard worker, and I'll be 30 at the end of this year. When should I strike at building a family business for my kids, or should I play it salary safe even though I know I'm undervalued and stretched thin? So I think you're framing this as a dichotomy that might not actually be a dichotomy. And so what am I saying here? If you have the skills and you happen to be in a market where you might have opportunities at another place, I think that there's a third door here, which is like you have the opportunity to go to a place that is going to pay you more for the skills that you bring to the market. And I think that like just really cutting through the noise, and if there's an opportunity to do something like that, I think that is going to be a much more high leverage use of your time rather than trying to, again, you're going to sacrifice all this time. Because if you really think about it, how long did it take my business to become profitable? Like multiple years, if not like multiple months. Till I had startup costs. I went into debt a little bit when I started. I had to get to a place where I was able to command the prices that I needed to charge in the market. And so all of this stuff is like, it feels good. It might get you really motivated and fired up, especially like new dad myself. I can imagine that's one of the reasons that you wrote in this way, because I think that we can, I'm in my early 30s too, can totally empathize with a lot of the stuff that you're sharing. And like that can be a really powerful motivator. And I think sometimes you get that idea of like, I'm doing it for my kids. That's going to be the thing that like ultimately gets me up and over the edge. And there's certainly entrepreneurs who have that story. But I think what you much further risk is what happens if it doesn't work out. And I think that there's obviously we can always go back and get a job at XYZ Restaurant Group. But I think like, what strain is that going to put on your relationship? Because you're already worried about, the time, the costs, you're not going to be hyper profitable on day one. Is there a world where you happen to have this idea of a food trailer and catering business where you can raise some money out the gate because you happen to be connected and you can actually like get a nice round of funding or a line of credit from a bank, and like there's actually some positive, like I can be reasonably cash flow positive on day one doing this thing because I have a list of clients. Again, I don't know your, situation that well in depth, but I think you're sometimes when you get to this place of I need to make this decision right here, right now, sometimes it's best to like take a deep breath, back up and say like, have I forced myself into like looking at these two buttons, or is there like a bigger, selection of buttons that I could potentially press here that ultimately set me up for success in a way that I actually like solve the problems I'm trying to solve. I'll add one more piece of context that has been helping me from a mindset problem of like being, conflicted with work stuff and young kids and being a new dad and all this stuff is like, I had this piece of content I came across that was like, age 4 is where your kids really start to kind of like transition or come into their own, or kind of like they don't need you as much. I've heard some other people say like 10 years is the golden years that you have with your kids when they're really, really young. You'll never get that time back. So I'm obviously thinking about that in depth. But the year 4 thing feels accurate to me in the sense of like, maybe it's best for you to, again, talking about being, undervalued and stretched thin and, undermined and underpaid. All of that stuff sucks to experience. But it's like, sometimes when you put a deadline on something, that can eliminate the burnout. Or said differently, burnout is sometimes experienced from lack of a deadline. And so if you can say to yourself, like, I'm going to, and again, admit this to yourself, I'm going to do this for the money until my kid turns 4. Just say that with yourself and sit with that and like just see how that feels. And if there's something there that is like, okay, yeah, I can do that. I'm also kind of curious on whose criticism are you worried about? Right? Is there like culinary school, graduates, you guys were peers, your old sous chef is going to say something to you about, dude, you're 32 and you're still a sous chef at XYZ place. Like, whose opinion are you worried about? Your uncle, whatever. Because it's like, in the context of, it seems like you know what you want. And it seems like you have priorities that kind of compete with, or maybe even supersede work here. And so your ability to kind of acknowledge those things and say the generic advice that I'm seeing everybody do, where they're, we just covered this story of like these people competing on a show for $1 million. It's like, well, I'm not doing that. And it's like, yeah, but they don't have your same situation. And so I love the context that you folks provide in some of these things, because it really, tailors the advice that I'm going to give. But, I just like sit with some of these variables almost and factor those into the equation and then see if that gets you to a more satisfying place. Because I can imagine I can already hear in the way that this person is writing, it's like there's a lot of pent up, anxiety and kind of indecision here. And it's like it's a big decision, but at the same time, it's if you feel you're skilled and you're being undervalued, it's like you can bring that confidence and gusto into your next interview that you're going to have with a company that is, like maybe hiring at a higher rate, and then you having the ability to say, like, I can really deliver what it is that you guys want here. I think it's just like, or you have increased benefits, you know what I mean? There's other things that are sometimes non-monetary that you can kind of experience when you make a big decision. And that's why we also talk about going for new jobs, like having the acknowledgement to say, I want a change here, and some of the skills that you might need to accomplish that. And so those are my
Yeah.
thoughts, Ray. I don't know if you had some insights, or
Yeah.
I know that you've gone through a couple different job changes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I first want to say just like kudos to his village, the family, as someone who has people around that can help with child support or child care. Like that is massive. And, that is such a strength and a plus. So kudos to the people around him. I think there's a couple things I noticed. I think that you should chase what you want to do, but within reason. And what I mean by that is you've made this in your head a decision between chasing your dream basically and continuing with a place that deep down isn't great. Like you just kind of saying like they're undermining your underpay. Like I could tell that they're probably a shitty place to work for. They're probably not a great place to work for. You don't need to make that decision. And how I see these things is you have to be more tactical. And in my opinion, you've romanticized this idea of being the chef at an up and coming food group, right? An up and coming restaurant group, right? And I think that you just need to, if your goal is to get to a food truck business or the opportunity to be in a business, and I would ask, you're saying you have the ability to take a shot at being an owner operator of a food trailer or catering business. Does that mean that someone's willing to fund you? Does that mean someone's willing to support you? If that's the case, then like Justin said, sit with it, do the math, see if that works out. If you have support, if you have financial backing, that might be good. But for me, you just need to get tactical in the sense of this group either way should probably not be in your future. If they're undermining and underpaying you, they're likely not going to be good for your situation. They're likely not going to be understanding of your situation. And so either way, it seems like wherever you're working now, you need to get out of. And if your goal in 3 to 5 years is to own your own business, what is the highest paying job you can go get within the food world to make money, to save money? Say you set a target and you want 40 grand stowed away for the next 3 years to be upfront investment for your business, whatever that target is. But whatever your target is to make more money to get to a point where you then can create your own business should be your goal. And so don't romanticize this. Like if your dream and goal is to build that business, don't romanticize being a chef in the cool up and coming group. Go get a higher paying job, even if it's at a place that maybe you're not throw that necessarily food wise. Maybe they're not doing everything cool, but they're actually valuing your time, paying you what you deserve, and giving you the benefits and time you need to be with your child and your family during the next few years. So that would be my advice. Don't romanticize the idea of being a chef in like this, like, independent, cool, upstart place that is also undermining and underpaying you and obviously not treating you right. Be tactical, be selfish. And it doesn't mean you have to go to a chain. If there's another restaurant group or a food industry role for a local consumer goods packaging or whatever it is, if there's a role you can find locally, it doesn't have to just be a chain, but something that pays you more and gives you what you need. But it's not necessarily like the food job that you have now. Go do that and focus on saving money, focus on your family, focus on that time, and then pursue your goals. I just think that either way, you don't need to be stuck in this. And I see a lot of chefs, and I've dealt with this. I mean, Justin, we talked about this. Like, I went from restaurants to food manufacturing and food development, and I love what I do now. But there was a lot of me that a lot of my identity was wrapped up in this idea of being a chef, being someone behind the line. Well, I do miss that. There's so much more I'm doing now that I love. But it did take me having to go. My ego and my worth can't just be that. Oh, I'm just a chef, and backing away makes me any lesser. And like as dumb as that might sound to someone from the outside of the food world, like being a chef is hard and you put a lot of time. There's a lot of like sunk cost fallacy to that. But you going for 3 years to make money and better your position financially with your family and get yourself ready for business is not a negative. No matter what anyone would say, like Justin said, no matter whatever judgment comes, go get a job that is best suited for you to support your family and to support your future endeavors financially in a business.
I'll invert this quickly for you, MC Ramsey, and see if this like fires off any neurons in your brain to maybe like wire this harder, because I know this can sometimes be such a rut that you find yourself in, and sometimes hearing the other side can be valuable. I get messages from people who are saying, I work as a private chef for a family and I'm getting paid such cozy money. It is like I'm getting paid 160 grand a year and I'm barely even kind of like scratching the surface of my potential. And all I want is to be pushed. All I want is to really go for some hard hours. And I really want to like see what I'm capable of in a kitchen that is like really going to go for it. And so it's almost like you guys are both experiencing the other side of the same problem. You know what I mean? Like different problems. And so what would you say to that person? Do you know what I mean? It's like, go experience, the getting yourself pushed environment. And then you can always go back to the making money thing. Now that you understand, like you end up walking both paths so you can walk the middle one. I use that analogy quite frequently because I believe that it's valuable sometimes to experience the extreme, and then you can get some insights on where you actually want to be. And if you haven't had that experience of like making, I'm calling it like there's necessity money. I'm stoked about the money I'm making. There's like comfy, cozy, golden handcuffs money. And then there's exorbitant, I'm really rolling in the dough type of money. And so it's like experiencing those different levels can be valuable for you because any of these interactions you're going to have, whether it's you're going to have your business partner meeting with your food trailer and catering company, or you're going to talk to an investor, you're going to be sitting across from a banker and they're going to be talking about giving you a loan, and you're going to have to decide, what's my salary going to be? And it's like, if you're only coming from the experience of like, this is my underpaid position, you're not going to know what you need to ask for. And so even Tim Ferriss talks about this idea of like, even at the end of the experience, will you learn something valuable, or will you come out ahead, even if it fails, quote unquote. And so that can be an experience for you of, even if I don't get the position that pays me $120K a year, I at least know how to kind of like set myself up for, an interview like that, or I know what skills I'm lacking, or I know how to go back to my previous employer. And like Ray and I didn't even talk about that as an option. Like if they're starting a restaurant group, they seem to be doing well. And so maybe this is a situation of you just sitting down with those employers and saying like, hey, I want to talk about a path to making X amount of dollars per year or per hour or whatever way you break it down. And that's a very interesting, like that's a Ramit Sethi script that he recommends to talk through people about how to get a raise at work. And I can send you some resources here if it would be helpful, but it's like, you're not sitting your employer down and saying, hey boss, I need $10,000 more next year, or else. You're sitting down with them and saying like, hey, what are some outcomes I can drive in the business that are going to justify an increase of this amount in my salary per year? Maybe it's like you're giving up one work stream and you're adding something else. Maybe it's you need to hit some sort of metric from a food cost or labor cost perspective. Maybe you guys need to win some sort of accolade. And all of that can be like contingent on, like I'm going to receive this benefit. It's almost like it sometimes feels a little tit for tat, but like otherwise, what are we talking about here? And so all of that can sometimes be valuable as you're navigating some of this stuff. So
I'll say this too. You want to do a food truck business / catering event. Go on LinkedIn, type in R&D chef in your area. Maybe there's a local business that needs an R&D chef for product. I'm telling, like these jobs exist. Like when I lived in Maryland, there was a company, they had like seafood restaurants and they were doing like launching crab cakes or whatnot. And and I interviewed with them. Go look for that, because at the end of the day, you have restaurant experience and that's great. And that's a certain type of business, but going to different restaurants and managing inventories and all that, or different food businesses outside of restaurants, will also help you with a food truck, with a catering event. And there's like, you might see it as a downgrade from being a chef to something else, but it actually could be very valuable. So like type in different things in the food industry. You might have an R&D chef position or a recipe development position for a local food brand. Go do that. If it pays more, it gives you benefits, gives you a 9 to 5, because then you can start actually building out your business while working 40-hour a week position and getting paid more. Like those things do happen. And it just all comes down to you being willing to say, okay, I'm not going to be a chef for the next, quote unquote, a restaurant chef for the next 1 to 2 years, but that's going to actually set me up for a very profitable food business. At the end of the day, like you owning your business is the goal, not being known as a restaurant chef. So that's all I would add.
And exactly what Ray said, like your career is long. Like if you just turned 30, like there might not be a world where you launch your food truck restaurant catering company until you're 45, and like really sit with that. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to reach any like young, Forbes 30 under 30 lists, but like who even cares about those? Like, I don't think Ray and I like ever cover, like any of those. Like if anything, we're talking about people who like have potential to do other cooler stuff that are like even more beyond it's putting people on our radar. But it's like, I don't think that we necessarily like give that many, kudos to people who are like doing things at young ages anymore, because it's like, it doesn't matter. Or you sometimes see those people fizzle out the fastest, or those are the people who like have managed to totally over index on one level of their business acumen. and then they totally flounder on other things that leads to so many problems of like they have a lawsuit 2 years later. And so that's something that we have to cover, unfortunately, as like a case study on the show. And so all of this is like, we want you to be well-rounded. The company is called Repertoire because I want you to build, like a foundation of things that you can use across an entire career, not just like, make this really cool dish that is this splashy thing, and then all of a sudden you fizzle out. And so Ray and I have like, folks, you'll have to let us know how you enjoy these like advice segments, us deep diving some questions that you folks have. I don't think we ever like really psychoanalyze people or, I hope this is the positive experience. It can sometimes feel like tough love, but I think I hope it all comes from this place that, Ray and I want to see all of you folks succeed. And so we have, tossed around this idea of maybe doing, one episode a month, maybe that is more like Q&A focused. And so if that would be of interest to you folks, please leave us a comment or, get in touch with us in some way, shape, or form with your question. And then we can get some insights into maybe covering that on a future episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe and like the video. Our subscribers are going up and we love to see those numbers. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate the show. That is a quick star rating. If you haven't rated the show yet and you've been watching for a while, what are you doing? It's like really, really fast. Like these platforms make it super easy for you to rate the show. And that means that other folks who like might enjoy this type of content can at least get it across their feed. And then it's on us to kind of like deliver on that. But it's one small thing you can do. These are free episodes that you folks are getting to experience. And so it just really means the world to get that feedback from you folks. And until next time, thanks for listening.